The sky that Thursday evening was an unsettling gray, the kind that hovered too low and pressed against the trees like it had something to hide. In the quiet town of Fairhope choir practice had just ended at 6:15 p.m. sharp as it always did. Students filtered out of the old brick high school, laughing rustling sheet music, tapping their phones with hurried thumbs as the clouds hinted at rain. But Amelia Warren wasn't among them. 17 years old, soft-spoken, always on time. Amelia was the kind of girl who left a room more quietly than she entered it. The kind of girl teachers loved because she remembered to say thank you, and classmates occasionally overlooked because she never demanded attention. That night she had walked into practice exactly 3 minutes early, clutching her black choir folder to her chest, earbuds trailing from her sweatshirt pocket. She smiled at Mr. Dobbs. The choir director took her seat on the second row of altos and began to warm up with the group. There was nothing unusual. No strange interruptions. No visitors. Nothing that anyone would later remember as a bad sign. She had just sung her solo, a gentle rendition of Pai Jesu. And then, as practice wrapped up, she packed her bag, tucked her hair behind her ear, the way she always did, and said goodbye to Rachel Mendoza, her best friend since the third grade. That was the last time anyone saw her. She never came home. Her phone stopped ringing by 7:03 p.m. And her voicemail message, "Hi, this is Amelia. Leave me something worth listening to," would soon become unbearable for her mother to hear. The Warren family lived just 4 blocks from the school. Amelia had walked that path hundreds of times, never once needing a ride. It was a straight shot, past the old library, 2 crosswalks, and the corner store where she sometimes bought cherry gum. Her mom always said she could do it with her eyes closed. But that night, the walk never happened. Or if it did, it vanished with her. Her mother, Leah Warren, started to worry around 6:45. At first, just a quiet pacing in the kitchen. She glanced at the clock, then the street. A breeze pushed the wind chime near the porch, an old brass treble clef Amelia had picked out at a garage sale. She was never late, her daughter. Never. By 7:15, the pacing turned into texting. By 7:30, the texting turned into calling. At 7:45, Leah grabbed her coat and keys and walked the familiar route toward the school herself. She expected to find Amelia sitting on the steps, lost in a playlist, or chatting with friends. But the front of the school was empty. The doors were locked. She walked around to the music hall entrance, the old door near the back where choir students exited. There was no sign of her daughter, just the echo of a loose flagpole clinking in the wind and the smell of rain gathering on concrete. At-home dinner had gone cold. Her father, Mark Warren, a UPS driver, had returned from a long shift, expecting laughter leftovers and the sound of Amelia humming in her room. Instead, he found silence, a trembling wife, and a house that suddenly felt far too large. By 9:12 p.m., Amelia was reported missing. The police didn't arrive with urgency, not at first. She was 17 after all. Old enough to wander. Maybe she went to a friend's. Maybe she needed space. Maybe it was nothing. But Leah knew. The kind of knowing that comes from the part of your gut that once held another life. Amelia didn't run away. She had a college audition next month, a choir competition that weekend, and a handwritten to-do list taped to her mirror. It read, practice solo, math quiz Monday, help mom with groceries, finish my letter, don't forget, breathe. It was that last line that nearly broke her mother. When investigators finally entered the school the next morning, they combed the choir room locker wing and the adjacent parking lot. Everything seemed intact. Her folder was missing, that's it. But her locker, that was the part Leah couldn't stop thinking about. Amelia's locker had been left ajar. A small crack, just enough to see the metal interior, a glimpse of a worn sticker she'd placed there years ago, a sunflower with the caption, "Shine quietly." Normally, Amelia was meticulous. She always locked her locker. Always. She even made fun of Rachel for forgetting. Yet somehow, it had been left partially open, as if she meant to return, but never did. Nothing was missing. Her textbooks were stacked neatly, her lip balm in the tray, a tiny photo of her and her brother clipped to the inside door. Only her choir folder was gone. And when the janitor was asked if anything unusual happened that night, he just shrugged. It was quiet, he said. Real quiet. But I did hear someone humming in the hallway. Thought it was the radio. It wasn't, because Amelia was gone, and the melody that echoed through the empty school would linger far longer than anyone could imagine. The next morning, the hallways of Fairhope High were filled with whispers. At first, it wasn't panic. Not exactly, just murmurs. Students asking one another if they'd heard from Amelia. Some figured she might have just ditched school. A senior prank, maybe. Something quiet. After all, Amelia was quiet. But by noon, the air had shifted. Teachers gathered behind closed doors, and Principal Harris's voice cracked slightly when he made the announcement over the intercom. If anyone has information on the whereabouts of Amelia Warren, please speak with the front office immediately. Her family is concerned, and we are cooperating with local authorities. It was the kind of announcement that silences a room, even in a building full of teenagers. Rachel Mendoza, still in disbelief, stared down at the untouched sandwich in her lunchbox. She had texted Amelia 3 times already that morning. No response. Not even the 3 blinking dots that let you believe just for a moment someone is there on the other end. I told her to wait for me. Rachel kept repeating. I told her I'd grab my bag and walk with her. But Amelia hadn't waited. That afternoon, police cruisers parked in front of the school. Officers fanned out into the neighborhood, knocking on doors, asking the same questions over and over. Did you see anything? Do you know this girl? Did she seem upset recently? The answers were always the same: no, no, no. By 5 p.m., the choir room was sealed off. Mr. Dobbs stood outside it, arms folded, shaking his head like someone had just ripped a hymn book in half. There's no way, he muttered. She was fine. She was just here. Leah and Mark Warren sat in the living room of their home, hands clenched together, their silence louder than sirens. On the kitchen table lay Amelia's unopened mail, a flyer from the State University's music department, a reminder about her upcoming voice audition. Her future had been printed in ink. And now it sat there unanswered. Detectives walked the 4-block path from the school to the Warren home again and again. No cameras, no witnesses, just that eerie open stretch of sidewalk that cut between 2 quiet neighborhoods where porch lights were still yellowed and cracked, and everyone minded their own business. Then came the first false lead. Around 7 p.m. that evening, a jogger called in. A tip said he saw someone matching Amelia's description, walking near the Levee Road outside town. Officers rushed to check. It wasn't her. Just a girl with the same brown braid walking her dog with headphones in. Another tip came from a convenience store clerk who claimed she sold cherry gum to a girl that looked like her. The timestamp was off. The camera feed was too grainy. It led nowhere. The town's unease began to grow heavier. Posters went up on utility poles and gas stations taped to high school lockers. Her photo, a school portrait from 2 months earlier, became the one image burned into everyone's mind. A smile that barely showed teeth. A kind of calm only Amelia carried. Local news picked it up. Fairhope teen disappears after choir practice. The anchors kept their tone sympathetic, but detached, like they were reporting a change in weather, not a life erased. By the third day, the scent of rain had been replaced by the smell of printed flyers and old coffee at the police station. Mark stopped shaving. Leah stopped sleeping. The house was too quiet, too still. On the fourth day, a manhunt was launched in the nearby woods. Dozens of volunteers walked in long, straight lines, calling her name through thick brush and scattered pine. Amelia, can you hear us? Nothing answered. Only the rustling wind and the snap of twigs under hesitant boots. That night, Leah stood in Amelia's room, for the first time since she vanished. She sat on her daughter's bed, still neatly made, still faintly smelling of lavender. A half-written journal entry sat on her nightstand pen, uncapped beside it. It read, "Sometimes I wonder if anyone really sees me. Not just looks really sees. Maybe that's what singing does for me. It makes me feel heard." Leah didn't cry. Not yet. Her grief hadn't found a shape, yet it was still searching for a body. But in the quiet of that room, something began to settle in her chest, the first tiny fracture of denial. Something had happened, and whatever it was, it had taken her daughter away. By the end of the first week, the Warrens had stopped saying when and started saying if. The posters had begun to yellow at the edges. The TV crews moved on. The community's voices quieted into that uncomfortable hush that always follows a tragedy that doesn't end neatly. A missing girl was one thing. A girl who stayed missing that unsettled people. Detective Marla Jensen took over the investigation full time. She was quiet, methodical, with a tired face that had seen too many cold cases and not enough conclusions. She sat in Amelia's bedroom for hours going through notebooks, flipping through CD cases, glancing at sheet music pinned to the wall. She opened every drawer, ran a gloved finger along the spines of Amelia's books. She found nothing. No sign of a runaway plan. No passwords scribbled in corners. No secret messages. "I don't think she left on her own," she said to the parents over kitchen coffee. "There would have been something. A note. A hint." Leah looked at her blankly. "You're saying someone took her?" "I'm saying we need to consider every possibility." Mark got up, left the room, punched the garage wall so hard the clock fell off its hook. Then came the tip line chaos. Dozens of calls poured in all dead ends. One woman in Mobile claimed she saw a girl matching Amelia's description, working in a diner under a fake name. Another man insisted she'd been taken by a cult. Someone else said she matched the composite sketch of a girl trafficked through the Louisiana border. Each was chased. Each collapsed. Detective Jensen followed everyone. And every time she returned to the Warrens' front door empty-handed, she knocked more softly. Then came the worst kind of hope. A body was found in a nearby creek. Jane Doe. Female, young. Everyone held their breath. It wasn't Amelia. And somehow, that made it worse. Because even a terrible ending was still an ending. Rachel Mendoza, Amelia's best friend, spiraled quietly. She stopped attending school for a month. Then she transferred altogether. Her mother said she had nightmares of Amelia standing in the school hallway, just staring. "She's cold, Mom," Rachel said once. "In my dream, she's always cold." The school eventually cleaned out Amelia's locker. Someone took down the ribbon people had tied on the handle. Someone boxed up her books, her pens, her unopened granola bar. They left the locker empty, but nobody took down the nameplate. 1 year passed, then two. Leah stopped baking Amelia's favorite muffins on Saturdays. Mark sold her bike, then bought it back from the pawn shop a week later and stored it in the attic wrapped in a tarp. People stopped asking. They started saying things like, "She was such a sweet girl," instead of, "Is there any news?" But there was no funeral, because there was no body. Only a silence so loud it pressed on every wall in their house. And in that silence was the question no one dared say aloud. What if Amelia had died in a way they'd never understand? What if she'd never left that school at all? What if she was still there, just in a place no one had thought to look? 16 years later, the choir room still smelled the same. It was an odd detail, the sort only someone like Leah Warren would notice. She stood in the doorway during the school's open campus legacy day, gripping the program in one hand, the other tucked into her coat pocket. Her eyes darted around the renovated room. New paint, new risers, a digital keyboard. But underneath it all, she swore she could still smell old wood polish and sheet music ink, her daughter's scent frozen in time. Leah hadn't been back since Amelia disappeared. Not once. She'd refused every invitation, ignored every alumni request, avoided the building like it might breathe her daughter's ghost into the air. But something had changed. She couldn't explain why she came that day, just that she woke up 16 years to the day and felt pulled. Maybe it was the nightmares that returned lately. Maybe it was the attic discovery last month, Amelia's old school bag untouched in a box of Leah's scarves, though she swore they'd searched that closet a dozen times. Or maybe it was the voicemail, an unknown caller. No message, just a soft static rustle and a faint piano chord before the line cut off. It was irrational, impossible. But Leah had learned long ago that grief makes space for the impossible. So here she was, standing in the exact room where her daughter was last seen. No one else seemed to notice her stillness, the way her eyes flicked toward the back row, like she expected someone to wave. The janitor on duty gave her a nod as he swept the hall. "Need help finding a name on the alumni list?" She shook her head. "Just looking." He gestured toward the far end of the corridor. "We opened up the old lockers for the tour class of 2007 and earlier. Bunch of them haven't been touched in decades." Leah hesitated. Amelia Warren, class of 2007. "Do you know which locker she had?" The man paused, thoughtful. "I think hers is still locked, actually. Never got reassigned. Weird, right? We used bolt cutters on the rest, but that one wouldn't budge. Rusted shut." He added casually, "Might open it today, though. Got new tools. Gotta clear it out eventually." And just like that, Leah was walking toward it. Heart pounding, hands cold. Locker 312. It looked ordinary. Dusty beige metal, faint streaks of rust curling along the vent slats. The combination dial was long corroded. A faded pink sticker, probably a heart peeled on the top corner. She stood there for a long time. The janitor came over, tools in hand. "You sure you want me to open it while you're here?" he asked gently. "Sometimes closure ain't what we think it is." Leah nodded. "Do it." The bolt cutter snapped once, then again. A metallic groan, a hesitant creak, and then the door opened. Inside was nothing at first, just shadows. But then she saw it tucked on the top shelf, barely visible in the dim fluorescent light. A navy blue choir folder with Amelia's name written in looping cursive, and under it, A pale yellow envelope curled at the edges sealed shut. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. It was Amelia's. Leah stared at the envelope as if it might vanish. Her fingers hovered just above it, trembling slightly. It was real, too real. The paper had yellowed with age, but Amelia's handwriting was unmistakable, careful loopy with that little flourish on her capital A. No one else wrote like that. The janitor stepped back instinctively, giving her space. "I'll give you a moment," he murmured, already disappearing down the hallway, broom forgotten. Leah reached for the envelope and felt a cold sweat gather at her hairline. She had imagined this moment for 16 years. Letters, messages, signs, but nothing prepared her for the actual weight of paper between her hands. It felt too small to hold something that mattered so much. With slow, deliberate movements, she slid her finger under the seal. It opened with a quiet tear. Inside, there was no letterhead, just lined notebook paper, folded twice, neatly, precisely. She unfolded it. The first line made her knees buckle. "If you're reading this, I didn't make it home." A wave of nausea surged in her stomach. She gripped the edge of the locker to steady herself. Her eyes scanned the rest heart thudding like a war drum. "I know something's wrong. It started last week, but no one believed me. I think someone's following me, not every day, just sometimes, like on Tuesdays after practice. I kept thinking it was in my head, but then someone opened my locker last Thursday and left this weird Polaroid on top of my music folder. It was gone before I could show anyone. It's like whoever did it wanted me to know they were watching, but also wanted to make me look crazy. I don't want to scare you, Mom, but I had to write this down somewhere, just in case. If anything happens to me, please tell Officer Tran. He's the only one who listened when I told him about the broken window in the practice hall. Everyone else just smiled and told me to get some sleep." The paper began to blur as Leah's eyes welled up. "I'm hiding this in my locker behind my choir folder. I hope it stays safe. I love you so much. Please don't stop looking. Even if they say I ran away, I wouldn't. You know I wouldn't. You know me." Amelia. The hallway spun. For 16 years, Leah had been told the same hollow refrains. She probably ran away. Kids wander. Teenagers change. They had turned her grief into speculation, her daughter into a footnote. But this was Amelia's voice. And it was clear as day. Amelia knew something, and now someone else might have known she was getting close. Leah folded the letter gently and slipped it into her coat pocket. She turned and walked out of the school without speaking to anyone. But her mind had already started moving fast, urgent. Officer Tran, the practice hall, Tuesdays after rehearsal, the broken window. She would go back. She would start over. And this time, she wouldn't be alone. Because Amelia had never really left. She had just been waiting for someone to hear her. That night, Leah sat at the kitchen table, the envelope laid flat in front of her, like an artifact pulled from the earth. She hadn't told Mark yet. She couldn't. Not until she knew what it really meant. He had buried the hope years ago, smothered it beneath layers of hard silence and muted rage. If she brought him this letter now, this fragile, heartbreaking sliver of Amelia's voice, it would undo him. She needed to know what it meant before she dragged him back into the storm. Her hands moved on their own. She opened her old laptop and began to search. Officer Tran. She didn't remember him well. Just a face from the early days, one of the dozens who walked through their home with notepads and solemn expressions. But Amelia remembered him, trusted him, and that meant something. After a few false starts, she found a name. Officer Daniel Tran, retired, now volunteering at a community center just outside town. The next morning, she drove out to find him. He was grayer now, slower, but when she said Amelia's name, something shifted behind his eyes. A shadow moved. They sat across from each other at a plastic cafeteria table, paper cups of lukewarm coffee between them. Leah slid the letter across. He read it quietly. When he finished, he didn't speak right away. "I always believed her," he said finally. "That week, she came to me twice. First time she said she felt watched. Second time she brought up that broken window behind the music wing. I logged it, but the school said it was just a storm crack. Didn't press." Leah leaned in. "Do you remember the Polaroid she mentioned?" Tran shook his head. "No, I never saw it. But she described it. Said it was taken from inside the choir room. Showed her sitting at the piano. She said she didn't know how someone could have taken it." Leah's mouth went dry. From inside the room, Tran rubbed his temples. She was scared. Not panicked, but you know that quiet fear some kids carry, the kind where they already know adults won't help them. Leah nodded. "I know exactly what you mean." He looked at her. "Why now? Why was the letter still there?" "I think someone wanted it to stay hidden," Leah said softly, "until they couldn't stop it anymore." Tran exhaled through his nose. "I should have done more. We all should have." They sat in silence. Then Leah opened her purse and pulled out something else, Amelia's choir folder, recovered from the top shelf of the locker. "I haven't opened it yet," she said. Tran reached across. "May I?" She nodded. He opened it gently. Pages of sheet music spilled out, brittle, hand-annotated with Amelia's small, tidy notes in pencil. He flipped through the stack, scanning each page. Then he stopped. Leah noticed his shoulders tense. "What is it?" Tran didn't answer at first. He lifted a final sheet from the back, turning it over. Taped to the reverse side was a photograph, faint bent at the corners. A Polaroid. He laid it face up. There was Amelia, seated at the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys, eyes downcast. But it wasn't the image that chilled Leah's spine. It was the reflection in the window behind her. A figure, faint but visible, standing just outside the glass, watching her. Close, too close. And Amelia hadn't noticed, but now Leah did, and so did Tran. The past wasn't buried. It had just been waiting in silence, one locker door away. Leah stared at the photo until her hands started to tremble. She had lived with every version of Amelia's disappearance her mind could conjure, that she'd been taken by someone in a van, wandered off after school hit her head, and forgotten who she was. But this was worse. Someone had been inside the school, close enough to take a photo through the window. Close enough that Amelia never noticed. Close enough that they could have touched her shoulder, whispered her name, and no one knew. Officer Tran studied the Polaroid with his jaw tight. "This photo? It doesn't make sense." Leah looked up. "Why not?" "There's no flash reflection. This wasn't taken through a classroom window from outside. It was taken from inside the building, behind the glass divider that looks out over the choir pit." Leah blinked. "That's not a real window." Tran shook his head. "It's a mirrored acoustic barrier, like the kind you find in music halls. On one side, it looks like a window, but it's a two-way mirror. You can see into the room from the back hallway, but from inside, all you see is your reflection." Leah whispered, So whoever took this was hiding behind the glass, watching. Tran nodded. And that hallway, it leads to a storage area no one used much. It's where the old music tech room used to be, equipment closet. And a few years before Amelia disappeared, it was converted into janitor access. The word hung in the air, janitor. Who was on duty back then, Leah asked. Tran's brow furrowed. I don't know off the top of my head. But if I can get the old staff logs, maybe. I want to go there, Leah said. The storage area. That hallway. Tran hesitated. The school's renovated now. Access is probably different. I don't care. If she left that letter and that photo behind, she wanted someone to find them. She left a trail. I have to follow it. Tran nodded slowly. Then we go back. Together. 2 days later, Leah walked through the choir building again, this time not as a guest, but with purpose. The back hallway was narrower than she remembered, lined with old tile and low ceilings that made the air feel thick. At the end was a metal door, unmarked, locked, rust-flecked at the corners. Tran used his volunteer badge to get access. The door creaked open. The storage area beyond was dim, forgotten, a time capsule of boxes, unused chairs, and outdated speakers. Leah's eyes moved across the space, slowly, heart in her throat. In the corner, there was a wall panel, painted the same as the rest, but slightly uneven, like it had been opened before. Tran walked to it and knocked once. Hollow. He pried at the edges with a flat tool. With a pop, the panel came loose. Inside was a small, dark compartment, like an old crawl space. Leah leaned in, covering her nose from the musty air. There was something there, folded cloth, a shoe, a strip of pink ribbon, and beneath that, a notebook, leather-bound, worn. Her heart stopped. Amelia's diary. She reached for it with shaking hands. Open to the first page. They keep saying it's nothing. But the person behind the glass, they're not just watching me anymore. I think they're waiting for me. The leather was cracked, its edges curled like paper scorched by time. But Amelia's handwriting remained intact, steady looping, unmistakably hers. Leah held the diary like it might crumble, like even reading it might wake something that should have stayed dormant. But she turned the pages anyway. She had to. The first few entries were normal. A girl writing about school choir and the everyday rhythm of teenage life. She wrote about learning new harmonies, helping Rachel study for finals, and how badly she wanted a dog. Then halfway through, something shifted. April 3rd. I saw the shadow again today. Same spot. Back hallway near the lockers. It never moves. But I can feel it. It's always there after choir. Just standing. Watching. I told Ms. Kepler, but she said, maybe I'm tired. She smiled like I was being dramatic. Leah's breath caught. She turned the page. April 5th. I heard the door close behind me in the music room, but no one was there. It wasn't the wind. I know what I heard. I ran out the front and didn't go back in. Nobody believes me. I told Officer Tran, and he asked good questions, but he looked worried too. That's worse than being ignored. More pages. Each entry darker. The fear creeping in like fog. April 9th. Rachel said she thought someone touched her hair in the practice room. She turned around and no one was there. She laughed it off, but she looked pale. April 10th, I found a candy wrapper in my locker that I didn't put there. I don't eat candy. Someone's been opening it. Then came a passage that made Leah freeze. April 11th. Today, when I left practice, the janitor was mopping the back hall. but the floor was dry. He didn't say anything, just stared at me. And when I turned the corner, I swear I heard him whisper my name. Tran looked over Leah's shoulder, his expression hardening. I think we've got our first real lead. Leah's hands trembled, but she turned the page again. April 12th. I'm hiding this book today. I don't want him to find it. If I disappear, please, please don't let them say I ran away. I didn't. Someone here is doing something. I don't know what he wants, but he doesn't look at me like a person. He looks at me like I'm already gone. The final entry was dated the day she vanished, April 13th. He was in the hallway again today. I tried to stay with Rachel, but she forgot something and ran back. I should have gone with her. I didn't want to walk alone. I think he knew that. There was no signature, no goodbye, just those last words underlined twice. I think he knew that. The weight of 16 years settled like stone in Leah's chest. The girl in those pages wasn't running away. She was bracing for something she couldn't stop. And someone inside that school had been watching, waiting, and then finally acted. Leah closed the diary slowly. Do you still have access to staff records? She asked Tran. He nodded. Then we find out who was assigned janitorial duty the day Amelia disappeared. Because the past wasn't over, and Amelia had just given them a name to find. 2 days later, Leah sat in the back office of the community center, the faint hum of fluorescent lights above her, and a folder clutched in her lap. Officer Tran had done what he promised, pulled strings with an old friend who still worked at the precinct, who in turn got a copy of the archived personnel list from the school district. The folder smelled like old paper and dust, but inside it, the past waited. Tran spread out the printouts on the desk. Here's the list of custodial staff assigned to the school between 2006 and 2008, he said. Most of them were part-time contractors. Only one was a full-time employee during that whole stretch. He pointed to a name halfway down the page, Walter Greaves. Leah stared at it. It meant nothing at first, just a name. Ordinary. Clean. But as her eyes drifted across the file, something cold bloomed in her chest. Start date, August 2005. Assigned building music and arts. Hall shift, 12 p.m. 8 p.m. terminated May 2007. Reason for dismissal. Voluntary resignation. Following administrative leave incident report redacted. Redacted, Leah asked, eyebrows drawing together. Tran nodded. That's the part that bothers me. Administrative leave means something happened. But the report's been sealed. Leah leaned closer, and his last active month was. Tran tapped the date, April 2007, the month Amelia vanished. Her stomach flipped. Was he ever questioned? Tran flipped through the pages. There's no record of it. No official interview, no notes. Which makes sense if no one connected the dots at the time. If he had access to the maintenance corridor, that would have put him directly behind the mirrored wall. Leah's voice was a whisper. He was in the walls. Tran pulled out a new sheet, a background summary. He's still alive. Lives one county over. Never married. Worked odd jobs after he left. Then just dropped off the map. No criminal record. But no employment history for the last 10 years either. Can we find him? Tran hesitated. We can try. But if what we suspect is true, and he's been watching, or worse, we need to be careful. Leah didn't flinch. I'm not afraid of him anymore. She thought of Amelia's final entry. The fear lined between her words. How she knew somehow that someone was circling her, that she might not make it home. And still, she wrote it all down. She left a trail, and now it was leading straight to Walter Greaves. Later that evening, Leah sat in her living room, the diary beside her. The Polaroid laid gently across the coffee table. She stared at the reflection in the photograph, the faint shape of a man half hidden in shadow. What scared her now wasn't just that someone had done this. It was that he might have watched everything that happened afterward. The vigils, the tears, the years. Somewhere out there, Walter Greaves had walked away, while Amelia stayed frozen in time. But Leah was done grieving in silence. Now, she was going to find him, and she was going to ask him what really happened behind that glass. The next morning, Leah and Tran sat in a diner on the edge of town, laptop open between them, a plate of untouched eggs slowly going cold. The search had taken hours, but they'd finally found something useful. Walter Greaves, age 61, former custodian, no current address listed, but one thing stood out: a P.O. box, registered in a rural town 2 hours north, rarely used, but recently active. Tran adjusted his glasses. If he's picking up mail again, he's either back in the area or never left. Leah nodded, her jaw tight. I want to go. Leah, I'm not waiting anymore. Tran saw something in her eyes. Not desperation, not recklessness, just quiet certainty. The kind only a mother could carry for 16 years and still hold with unwavering focus. By midday, they were on the road. As the car wound through the hills, Leah watched the trees blur past. Her hands clenched tightly in her lap. She was preparing herself for two possibilities: that they would find nothing, or that they would find everything. The P.O. box was tied to a small post office in a forgotten town with no traffic lights and more barns than houses. Leah stayed in the car while Tran went inside. When he returned, his face was unreadable. He came in yesterday, Tran said. Left with a small package. Clerk said he walks in about once a month. Keeps to himself. Leah's pulse quickened. Do they know where he lives? Tran hesitated, then held out a slip of paper. They don't give that out. But the clerk said he always walks up the same trail after picking up mail, about half a mile east. Lives in one of the old forest cabins. Let's go. They hiked quietly through dense woods. The deeper they went, the heavier the air became, damp with moss and silence. Then just beyond a thicket of pine, they saw it, a cabin, weathered, sagging under its own roof. A single chimney leaned like a question mark, and in front of the door, a bicycle wheel. Rusted, propped against the steps. Leah froze. It looked exactly like Amelia's old bike. Tran stepped ahead of her. Stay behind me. They approached slowly. The porch creaked under their weight. No sound came from inside. No light. Just the hum of the wind and the far-off rustle of dry leaves. Tran knocked. No answer. He tried the door. Unlocked. They stepped inside. The air was stale, thick with mildew and the sharp scent of oil. Dust blanketed every surface. Old photographs, newspaper clippings, and yellowing sheet music were pinned along the walls, all of them centered on the Melrose Choir. Leah's breath caught. At the far end of the room sat a desk. On it, neatly arranged, was a stack of Polaroids. Amelia. Dozens of her in the halls, at the piano, leaving school. And one that made Leah stagger: Amelia in the forest behind the school, looking directly into the camera. Her expression unreadable. No fear, just quiet, resigned recognition. Someone had led her there and taken that photo. Tran opened a drawer and pulled out a bundle of cassette tapes. Dates written on the spines. April 2007. Choir room. 4 p.m. Locker wing. Evening. Practice hall. Tuesday. He looked at Leah. He recorded her. He cataloged everything. Leah stared at the wall of images. This wasn't random. It was planned, controlled, obsessed. And whoever Walter Greaves really was, he hadn't just watched Amelia. He'd studied her. Leah stood in the center of the cabin, surrounded by the ghost of her daughter's final days. It was all there too much, and still not enough. The photos, the tapes, the sickening shrine. Tran pulled a flashlight from his coat and opened a narrow door at the back of the room. A staircase led down into darkness. "Stay close," he said. The basement was unfinished dirt floor stone walls, and a single bulb swaying from the ceiling like it couldn't decide whether to stay lit. And there, against the far wall, was a wooden chest, old, heavy, padlocked. Tran knelt and examined the lock. "We need a warrant to open this." Leah didn't wait. She grabbed a rusted crowbar resting nearby and wedged it into the latch. With a loud pop and a groan of protest, the lock gave way. The lid creaked open. Inside were bundles of clothing choir uniforms, faded and moth-eaten, and beneath that, a stack of notebooks. They weren't Amelia's. The handwriting was jagged, erratic. Confessional. Tran picked one up and flipped through the pages. "They're his," he muttered. "His journals." Leah moved closer. Over Tran's shoulder, she read, "She's perfect. Like the others, but brighter. I didn't mean to frighten her. I just wanted to see if she'd notice." She noticed everything. She writes in violet ink. Another entry. "I saw her walk with the girl named Rachel. I didn't like Rachel. She talked too much, distracted her. I waited for the right day." Leah covered her mouth, swallowing back nausea. He had written it all down. Tran's voice was steady but tight. "We have enough to reopen the case and charge him." "Where is he?" Leah asked. "Why isn't he here?" "I don't know," Tran admitted. "But he left all this. Either he panicked or he wanted us to find it." That possibility chilled Leah more than anything. Back at the precinct, the evidence was processed. Tran submitted the tapes, the journals, the Polaroids. A warrant was issued, an arrest order, an APB. But Walter Greaves had vanished. No sightings, no traces. It was like he knew the moment they'd arrived. Or worse, he'd been watching them. Leah sat in the interrogation room, even though she wasn't being questioned. She held the last Polaroid, the one of Amelia, in the forest. There was something in her eyes, not terror, not even sadness. It looked like resignation, like she'd known what was coming and had accepted it. Leah whispered, "I'm so sorry, baby. I wasn't there." She had carried the grief for 16 years. Now she would carry the truth. And she would not stop until Walter Greaves was found. Because Amelia had trusted her, trusted that someday someone would listen. And now the world was listening. The media picked up the story within 48 hours. A cold case cracked open. A missing girl. A cabin in the woods. Photographs. Recordings. Journals. The headlines were gripping, but none of them captured the real horror, the years of silence, the hollow birthdays, the way Leah had learned to hold a conversation with an absence. Still, the exposure did something unexpected. It woke people up. Calls began to pour in from alumni, teachers, even former staff. One by one, names returned. People remembered things they had buried or dismissed. Small moments, off feelings. Things that meant nothing back then, but meant everything now. A retired music teacher named Irene Lovell left a message with Tran. Her voice shook, even on voicemail. I didn't know what I saw. But now, I think I did. I think I did. They met with Irene at her home, a modest apartment with faded flower wallpaper and too many clocks. She served them tea with trembling hands. I worked at Melrose from 1993 to 2008, she began. I retired a year after Amelia vanished. I still remember her. She had a high soprano, not powerful, but clear like glass. Leah smiled faintly, though her eyes stayed fixed. After Amelia went missing, Irene continued, they told us she must have run away. But I didn't believe that. None of us really did. We didn't have anything. No answers. She sipped her tea and glanced out the window, as if remembering hurt too much to look at Leah directly. There was one thing she said. I saw Walter Greaves, the janitor, after school sometimes, but not cleaning. Just standing in the choir balcony, watching rehearsal. I once asked what he was doing up there, and he said he was just fixing a light. She paused, but there wasn't a light up there. Leah leaned forward. Why didn't you say anything? Irene's face crumpled. Because I didn't want to accuse an innocent man. And after Amelia vanished, he was gone. And no one connected him. I thought it was just a coincidence. Until I saw the news. She wiped at her cheek, embarrassed by the tears. I should have said something. No, Leah said quietly. You're saying it now. Later, back at the precinct, Tran pulled up security footage from nearby gas stations and transit hubs. He widened the radius. They had a face now. They had motive evidence witness statements, but still Walter Greaves was gone. Until 3 days later, when a hiker in Westlake reported something strange, an abandoned tent deep in the woods, filled with Polaroids and notebooks. One name was written repeatedly on the inside canvas. Amelia, Amelia, Amelia. There was no sign of Walter, but the fire pit was still warm. He was close, closer than ever, and now Leah knew what had to come next. She wasn't going to wait for him to be found. She was going to speak. She was going to tell Amelia's story to the world. Every piece of it. The joy, the fear, the trail of breadcrumbs Amelia had left behind. Because the more people who knew, the less shadow Walter could hide in. Her daughter had written it all down, and now her mother would say it out loud. The podcast studio wasn't glamorous, just a spare room at a local community station with foam soundproofing and a scarred wooden desk. But when Leah sat down in front of the mic, it felt like a pulpit or a witness stand. Her voice, when it came, wasn't polished. It wasn't dramatic. It was honest. I'm Leah Dalton, she began. My daughter's name was Amelia. She went missing 16 years ago after choir practice. I want to tell you who she really was. She spoke for 45 minutes about Amelia's laughter, her violet ink, her habit of humming Debussy while brushing her teeth, about the day she didn't come home, about the ache that never stopped, about the diary, the locker, the cabin. She didn't name Walter Greaves. She didn't have to. Everyone listening knew. The podcast aired that night. Within 24 hours, it had over 700,000 downloads. The clip spread fast, not because of some catchy headline or twist ending, but because it was a mother breaking 16 years of silence and finally being heard. 2 days later, Tran called Leah. We got a tip. A motel clerk outside of Carson recognized him. Says he paid cash, didn't give a name, but looked rattled, nervous. That town was only an hour west. They were getting close again. The search intensified now with public support. Listeners of the podcast formed online groups, sharing tips, scanning public sightings, contacting local stations, to amplify Amelia's story. And then something unexpected happened. One of the podcasters received a voicemail, a man's voice. I didn't mean to hurt her. She saw me, that's all. I just wanted to watch her sing. I didn't mean for her to fall. Then silence. Then a click. They traced the call. A payphone outside an old bus depot in Fern Hollow, barely a dot on the map. Leah didn't sleep that night. She sat in Amelia's old room, untouched quiet, still lined with her daughter's handwriting on sticky notes, her collection of pressed flowers long since faded. She pressed the Polaroid to her chest and whispered, "We're close, baby. We're close." She didn't need revenge. She didn't want violence. She wanted truth. And she wanted the world to remember Amelia not just as a headline or a cold case, but as hers. A girl who mattered, who wrote things down so someone someday could finish her story. The bus depot at Fern Hollow wasn't much more than a canopy of rusted tin and a bench that looked older than the town itself. The payphone stood like a relic against a brick wall receiver, dangling slightly, as if recently used. Tran stood nearby, dressed plain, his badge tucked out of sight. Leah waited in the car across the street, her fingers digging into the steering wheel. She wasn't supposed to be there, but she couldn't not be. Inside the depot, cameras had been installed the day before thanks to the county's cooperation, and a favor Tran had called in. They didn't expect him to come back, but he did. At 9:41 p.m., under flickering lights, Walter Greaves walked into view. Same face, a little older, a little slower, same eyes. He reached for the payphone again. But this time, Tran stepped out from behind the column. "Walter." The man froze. He didn't run, didn't speak, just stood there as if he'd been waiting. Later in the interview room, he barely spoke. Not to Tran, not to the second detective, but when Leah asked to see him, and Tran allowed it under supervision, something shifted. He looked at her, and for a moment those 2 decades collapsed. "I knew she was special," he said, voice quiet, gravelly. "You stole her," Leah said. He blinked. She was never afraid. Not like the others. Leah's throat tightened. "What did you do to her?" Walter didn't answer. He only said, "She left something behind. Did you find it?" That night, back at the cabin crime scene, teams returned to re-examine everything, this time more aggressively. They tore up floorboards, stripped back paneling, and at 2:17 a.m., in a crawl space behind the chimney, they found it. A shoebox. Inside a final notebook. The handwriting unmistakable. Amelia's. It was different than the diary. This was a letter. A journal she'd started once she realized she wasn't getting out. She wrote about the days, the dark, the cold, the soft voice that visited her through the walls, and the songs she sang in her head to stay sane. On the last page, a pressed flower, dry, brittle, a violet, her favorite. Below it, just 4 words, "I still remember music." When Leah read those words, she didn't cry, not right away. She closed the notebook, held it against her heart, and whispered her daughter's name, not like a question, not like a plea, like a lullaby, a song returning home after 16 long years. The trial of Walter Greaves began 6 months later. He was charged with unlawful confinement, kidnapping, obstruction of justice, and though no body had ever been found, circumstantial evidence of murder. But for Leah, the courtroom wasn't about punishment. It was about voice. She testified on the 4th day. Her voice didn't waver. She brought Amelia's diary, the violet ink, still fresh, despite the years. She read aloud the final line from the shoebox notebook, "I still remember music." The gallery fell silent, and something shifted, not just in the room, In the town, in the country, the Melrose School Board announced the construction of a new auditorium, the Amelia Dalton Memorial Hall, funded by a donation campaign that raised over $300 in 2 weeks, much of it from strangers who had heard her story online through the podcast or in whispered retellings passed between mothers, daughters, and survivors. Leah stood at the groundbreaking ceremony. The press asked her how she felt. She answered simply, "Amelia didn't get to finish her song. But now, others will sing it for her." A year later, Leah published a book, part memoir, part case study, part letter to her daughter. She titled it Violet Ink. The cover was plain, no photo, just a single pressed flower. Inside the dedication read, "For the ones who still remember music, even in silence." On the anniversary of Amelia's disappearance, Leah returned to the locker at Melrose. It had been left untouched, now sealed behind glass in the school's hallway. Students walked past it every day. Some stopped, some didn't. But every so often, someone would pause and listen. Because when you leaned close enough, if you listened carefully, you could almost hear the hum of a girl's voice, not haunting, not sad, just soft, like a choir warming up, like music finding its way home. And after 16 years, Amelia had, not in the way Leah had once prayed, but in the way stories allow us to carry the ones we love, forward note by note, word by word, never truly gone, just remembered forever.